After his love was rejected, he locked the woman inside a cage like a pet. The movie begins by showing a man named Seth waking up and going through a life that feels incredibly monotonous. Every single day, he follows the exact same routine without anything exciting ever happening in his life. He cleans himself up, eats a simple breakfast, takes the bus, and eventually arrives at work.
There's the man.
Seth works as a caretaker at an animal shelter. His daily responsibilities are fairly simple, such as cleaning cages, feeding dogs, and taking care of the animals there.
Want some food? Yeah. Okay. Looking good. Queenie?
Once his shift is over, Seth usually goes straight home without going anywhere else, as if his entire life only revolves around the same endless routine. However, everything starts to change during one of his usual bus rides home when Seth suddenly notices a woman who seems strangely familiar to him. After looking at her more carefully, Seth realizes that the woman is actually Holly, a girl he used to go to school with. Feeling both curious and attracted to her, Seth finally gathers the courage to talk to her. He starts the conversation by calling out Holly's name, even though Holly herself clearly has no idea who he is. Holly even tries to remember him, but Seth casually tells her that it makes sense because they were never really close back then. Even so, Seth admits that he still remembers her very clearly. Their short conversation continues until Holly finally reaches her stop. Before she leaves, Seth tries asking if they could meet again sometime. However, Holly gives no response at all and simply walks away.
It was nice to see you again.
Even though the encounter is very brief, Seth cannot stop thinking about her afterward. To him, Holly seems like the perfect woman he has always wanted. Little by little, his curiosity slowly turns into obsession. That night, Seth begins searching for Holly's personal information online. He finds her social media accounts and starts learning everything about her, including her hobbies, interests, and personal life. The next day at work, Seth approaches his co-worker, Nate, and asks for advice on how to get closer to a woman. At first, Nate does not seem very interested because he's not particularly close with Seth. But after realizing Seth is being serious, Nate eventually gives him a few suggestions. He tells Seth that the best way to approach a woman is by learning the things she likes and slowly giving her attention over time. Seth remembers Nate's advice and continues working as usual. Later that day, Seth is asked to help a doctor put down an old dog that turns out to be his favorite dog at the shelter. The doctor even suggests that Seth adopt the dog instead, so it would not have to be euthanized. However, Seth refuses because pets are not allowed where he lives. After the procedure is finished, Seth helps burn the dog's body before returning to clean the cages like usual. While working, he accidentally discovers an old, unused room hidden inside the shelter. Seth stares at the room for a moment but eventually decides not to think too much about it and continues with his work. That night, Seth finds himself thinking about Holly once again. He starts writing down the things she likes while practicing conversations in front of the mirror so he will not feel nervous when talking to her again.
Hey, Holly, hey. What time to get lunch? I was just wondering if you wanted to get maybe dinner. Hey, Holly, how's it going? Hey.
The following day, Seth finally visits the restaurant where Holly works. Coincidentally, Holly is the one serving him. Seth once again tries to make Holly remember who he is, but Holly does not seem very interested and simply focuses on doing her job. Even so, Seth continues trying to get closer to her. After Holly finishes serving him, Seth immediately invites her to attend a concert for her favorite band. He pretends that his friend canceled at the last minute, leaving him with one extra ticket. Unfortunately, the invitation only makes things awkward. Holly politely rejects him because she already has a boyfriend. Instead of making Seth back off, the rejection only causes his obsession with Holly to grow even stronger. He secretly begins following her everywhere she goes and eventually even learns where she lives. Holly gradually notices that someone may be following her, so she tells her best friend Claire about it. However, Claire responds casually and jokes that the guy can approach Holly as long as he is handsome. After calming down a little, Holly calls her boyfriend, Eric. During the phone call, the two discuss their relationship, which is clearly not going very well. Afterward, Holly talks to Claire again about Eric. Claire even advises Holly to leave him because Eric has cheated on her before and repeatedly hurt her emotionally.
So, the other night with Eric. Are we gonna go there again? Forgive, move the fuck on already.
The scene then shifts to the next day while Holly is working at the restaurant. Shortly after arriving, she is informed that someone has sent flowers for her. Curious, Holly checks the bouquet and finds a card that says, "Be mine." At first, Holly assumes the flowers were sent by Eric. Because of that, after work, she immediately visits Eric at the bar where he works and asks him to stop sending flowers like that. However, Eric looks genuinely confused and tells her that he never sent her any flowers at all. Unbeknownst to Holly, Seth is also there secretly listening to their conversation. Feeling embarrassed after realizing she misunderstood the situation, Holly heads to the restroom to calm herself down. But without her realizing it, Seth quietly follows her there. Seth brings up the flowers again and indirectly admits that he was the one who sent them. At that point, Holly begins feeling genuinely disturbed and frightened. She firmly tells Seth to stop following her because his behavior is becoming extremely creepy. Holly then tries to leave, but Seth continues chasing after her until Eric finally steps in. Eric immediately punches Seth and throws him out of the bar. However, shortly afterward, Seth accidentally finds Holly's personal journal lying outside the building. After cleaning the wounds on his face from the fight with Eric, Seth begins reading Holly's journal that he accidentally found outside the bar. At first, Seth is only curious about Holly's life, but the more pages he reads, the more obsessed he becomes with her. At the same time, Seth starts thinking again about the abandoned room he previously discovered at work. The next day, while working at the shelter, he returns to the unused room and explores it more carefully. The place turns out to be quite large and rarely visited by anyone. Seeing the condition of the room, Seth comes up with a disturbing plan. He begins turning the area into a large cage strong enough to hold a human being inside. Once everything is prepared, Seth continues gathering information about Holly, learning her daily routine, and even buying sedatives because he has already decided to kidnap her. Meanwhile, Holly begins feeling uneasy after what happened at the bar that night. She constantly feels as if someone is watching her from a distance. The fear makes Holly much more cautious around the people nearby. At one point, when a homeless man approaches her late at night, Holly panics and immediately sprays pepper spray into his face before quickly running away. After finally arriving home safely, Holly locks all the doors, closes the curtains, and makes sure nobody's outside. Once she feels slightly calmer, she cleans herself up and tries to rest. However, shortly after Holly turns off the lights and begins falling asleep, Seth suddenly appears from behind, covers her mouth, and injects her with sedatives until she loses consciousness. After successfully overpowering her, Seth hides Holly's body inside a large cardboard box so it will look like an ordinary package. He then secretly brings her to his workplace later that night. There, Seth runs into Nate, who is on night duty at the shelter. Nate casually asks what Seth is carrying so late at night. Remaining calm, Seth lies and says their boss asked him to deliver a package. Since Nate is not too suspicious, he simply asks Seth to sign the attendance sheet first. However, the situation quickly becomes tense when Nate suddenly hears strange noises coming from inside the room. He immediately asks Seth to stay quiet so he can figure out where the sound is coming from. Seth begins panicking and tries distracting Nate because he fears Holly may wake up and make noise inside the box. Fortunately, after checking around for a while, Nate assumes the sound is only coming from a faulty air conditioner. Seth successfully avoids suspicion and immediately takes Holly down to the secret room he prepared earlier before locking her inside the cage. When Holly finally wakes up, she is horrified to find herself trapped inside a metal cage. She panics and struggles with all her strength, desperately trying to break the lock using her bare hands. But everything is useless because Seth secured the cage tightly. During her desperate attempt to escape, Holly even loses one of her fingernails. The next day, after finishing his work, Seth returns to feed Holly before leaving her alone inside the room again. From that point on, Seth only visits once a day to bring Holly food and water before abandoning her in the cage once more. At first, Holly refuses to eat and constantly fights back, but by the second day, she begins begging Seth not to leave her alone anymore. However, Seth insists that everything he is doing is for the sake of their relationship. Not wanting to starve to death, Holly eventually starts eating and drinking what Seth gives her. Meanwhile, Seth feels incredibly happy with the situation. To him, finally having Holly completely to himself makes his life feel perfect. The following day, Seth visits Holly again and starts cleaning up her mess, including removing a dead rat Holly had killed inside the room earlier. While talking, Holly asks Seth what his real intentions are. She questions whether he plans to hurt her or do something terrible to her. But Seth insists that he never intended to do any of those things. Instead, Seth claims that he only wants to save her.
Are you gonna kill me?
I hope not. Before I met you, I was just floating through life.
After leaving the room, Seth nearly gets caught when he unexpectedly runs into Nate, patrolling near the lower level of the building. Feeling nervous, Seth quickly leaves to avoid raising suspicion. However, the next day when Seth returns to visit Holly again, all the dark secrets finally begin coming to light. Seth reveals that he has been secretly reading Holly's journal this entire time. From those pages, he discovers horrifying truths about Holly that nobody else ever knew. It turns out that Claire, Holly's best friend, who appeared several times earlier in the story, has actually been dead for a long time. The Claire Holly keeps talking to is nothing more than a hallucination inside her mind. In the journal, Holly explains how everything began after she discovered that Eric had been cheating on her with Claire. That night, Holly and Claire talked inside a car while Claire tried apologizing and explaining herself. But consumed by rage, Holly suddenly slammed on the gas pedal, causing the car to crash.
Are you gonna tell me? Come on, Claire. You know. Eric?
I'm sorry, you have no idea how shitty I feel about this whole thing. We were so drunk and it didn't mean anything.
Even though both of them could have survived the accident, Holly completely lost control of herself. She grabbed a sharp piece of broken glass lodged in her body and stabbed Claire in the eye, killing her. After that incident, Holly's dark side fully emerged. She began getting involved with multiple men only to manipulate and eventually murder them one by one. Instead of being horrified by the truth, Seth becomes even more obsessed with Holly after learning everything. To him, Holly is the perfect woman he has always been searching for. That is why Seth convinces himself that he must protect Holly from the outside world, even if his methods are completely twisted. Having no reason to deny anything anymore, Holly simply smiles and admits to all of her crimes. Seth could have easily turned Holly over to the police after discovering the truth, but instead, he chooses to hide her secrets and continue keeping her inside the cage. Afterward, Seth leaves Holly alone once again, and at that moment, Claire's figure appears inside Holly's imagination once more, as if she is still the only friend keeping Holly company in her loneliness.
I'm just making sure your head's still in the game. Playing along.
If you've got something to say. I don't need another useless pep talk, Claire.
The next day, Seth visits Holly again and gives her a piece of cloth so she can clean herself inside the cage.
I understand that. It's a crime of passion or whatever.
Yes.
Wrong, I do know you. I know you from this.
Seth's got a little crush.
After making sure Holly is fine, Seth heads back upstairs because he still has to finish his usual work at the shelter. However, lately, Seth has started acting differently than before. He often zones out and no longer focuses on his job the way he used to. While Seth is lost in thought, his female boss suddenly approaches him and asks him to come into her office. There, she begins criticizing him because several cages at the animal shelter have become filthy and poorly maintained. Previously, Seth was known as one of the most hard-working and careful employees there. His boss tells him that he no longer seems like the same man she once knew. Hearing that, Seth nervously asks whether he is going to be fired. However, his boss says she is still willing to give him one final chance. But if he makes another mistake like this again, she will not hesitate to fire him from the shelter.
The kennels are filthy. We've got bung up in the stockroom. Is something wrong? That's the question, isn't it?
You firing me?
Disciplinary notice.
Seth chooses to go straight home instead of visiting Holly like he normally does. While alone at home, Seth starts thinking deeply about his relationship with Holly, and slowly he develops a desire to completely control her life. Up until now, Seth has always felt that Holly was somehow able to influence and control his thoughts, so this time he wants to turn things around and prove that he is the one in control. The following day, Seth returns to see Holly while bringing only 2 chocolate bars as her daily meal. Feeling that the amount of food is far too little, Holly immediately asks Seth for more. However, Seth firmly refuses and tells her that from now on, he will be the one making all the rules. He wants Holly to understand that he now has complete control over her life. Hearing that, Holly begins showing a sad expression in front of Seth. But without Seth realizing it, Holly is actually manipulating his emotions. And just as she expected, Seth slowly starts giving in because he still loves her deeply. Eventually, Seth decides to grab extra snacks from a nearby food shelf, so Holly will not stay hungry. While Seth is distracted getting more food, Nate, who happens to be patrolling around the basement area, accidentally discovers the hidden room. Curious, Nate enters the area and explores it until he eventually finds a large cage with a woman trapped inside. Nate is immediately shocked after realizing Holly's being held there like a prisoner. The moment Holly sees another person, she desperately begs Nate to free her. She tells him to find something that can break the cage lock. Still confused, Nate tries to stay calm while asking what is actually happening, but Holly tells him she does not have enough time to explain everything. At the same time, Seth begins sensing that something is wrong outside the room. He immediately walks back toward the area where Holly is being held. The moment Seth arrives, Holly instantly notices him standing there. But instead of warning Nate, Holly secretly signals Seth to attack him. Seth immediately strikes Nate with the baton he's carrying. However, Nate turns out to be much stronger than Seth expected. As Seth begins losing the fight, he quickly pulls out his folding knife and stabs Nate. With Holly helping by sticking her leg out and causing Nate to trip onto the floor, she immediately tells Seth to grab a brick and attack Nate before he can get back up again. At first, Seth hesitates, clearly terrified by what he is about to do. But eventually, he grabs the brick and repeatedly smashes it against Nate's head until Nate finally dies.
You have to do exactly what I say. Are you listening?
After everything is over, Seth looks completely horrified and cannot believe he has just killed someone. Meanwhile, Holly remains strangely calm throughout the entire situation. She even begins telling Seth how to get rid of Nate's body so nobody will ever find out what happened. Seth points out that Nate's body is too large to fit inside the furnace they use for burning dead dogs at the shelter. However, Holly calmly says there are other ways to erase the evidence. She instructs Seth to cut Nate's body into smaller pieces, remove anything that could identify him, and dispose of the remains carefully so no trace is left behind. Some pieces of Nate's flesh are even fed to the dogs at the shelter, so it will look as though nothing ever happened. Seth is completely traumatized and clearly does not want to do any of it, but Holly continues pressuring him until he finally obeys her. After everything is finished, Seth starts cleaning the blood off his clothes and body.
Do you want to practice what you're gonna say?
Strangely enough, seeing Seth willing to go that far for her actually makes Holly begin developing feelings for him. In the middle of the tense situation, Holly even asks Seth to come closer because she feels cold and wants him to warm her up. However, Seth gently refuses and explains that he never intended to force himself on her in that kind of way. While cleaning the remaining blood stains left behind by Nate, Seth becomes overwhelmed with fear and regret. He cannot stop thinking about what would happen if the police ever discovered the murder. Seth is visibly trembling and struggling to calm himself down because deep inside he realizes that his life has already been completely destroyed after what happened. However, unlike Seth, Holly remains incredibly calm. In a relaxed tone, Holly tells him that feelings of fear like this are perfectly normal for someone who is killed for the first time. According to Holly, all the panic and guilt will slowly fade away over time until Seth eventually gets used to it and feels normal again. Feeling mentally exhausted and terrified, Seth finally decides to go home and leaves Holly alone inside her cage. But when Seth returns to the upper area of the animal shelter, he notices his female boss talking to a detective who has arrived looking for Nate after he suddenly disappeared without a trace. The moment the detective sees Seth, he immediately asks to speak with him privately. Seth is then taken into a room and questioned about his relationship with Nate. Trying to remain calm, Seth explains that the two of them got along perfectly fine and never had any problems with each other. After that, the detective asks when Seth last saw Nate. Nervously, Seth answers that the last time he saw Nate was around 9 o'clock the previous night while Nate was on duty. Seth also adds that Nate supposedly had some personal matters to deal with and briefly asked Seth to cover his position outside the guard area. Unfortunately, Seth's explanation only makes the detective more suspicious. Several parts of Seth's story sound inconsistent, causing the interrogation to become increasingly tense. Even so, the detective still does not have enough evidence to officially consider Seth a suspect, so Seth is eventually allowed to leave. The following day, Seth visits Holly inside the cage once again. But this time, Holly refuses to speak to him at all. She even tells Seth that he should stop visiting her if he does not truly love her. Hearing that, Seth immediately tries convincing Holly that he genuinely loves her and would do absolutely anything for her. However, Holly claims that his words mean nothing unless he is willing to prove them. Once again, Holly begins manipulating Seth's mind. She tells him to prove his love in an extreme way by cutting off one of his own fingers for her. Naturally, Seth immediately refuses because he thinks the request is completely insane. But Holly continues manipulating his emotions until Seth eventually falls right into her trap. In the end, Seth actually cuts off one of his own fingers just to prove his love for Holly. However, after Seth commits such a horrifying act, Holly immediately takes advantage of his weakness. While Seth is distracted by the pain, Holly quickly grabs Seth's knife and threatens to hurt herself if he refuses to open the cage door. Panicking, Seth desperately tries calming Holly down because he is terrified she might actually do something reckless. But Holly continues pressuring him until Seth finally gives in and unlocks the cage to stop her from harming herself. The moment the cage door opens, Holly slowly steps out and walks toward Seth. For a brief moment, everything seems calm as Holly suddenly hugs and kisses him as if she truly accepts him. But the entire thing turns out to be a trick. The second Seth lets his guard down, Holly suddenly attacks and slashes his neck with the knife, seriously injuring him. The scene then shifts to Holly, who has finally escaped from captivity and returned to living a seemingly normal life again. She even reunites with her boyfriend, Eric. One morning, while preparing breakfast, Holly accidentally sees something on Eric's phone and realizes that he is still cheating on her with another woman. After discovering the betrayal, Holly quietly grabs a kitchen knife and slowly walks toward Eric. For a moment, the situation becomes extremely tense, making it seem like Holly is about to do something terrible to him. But unexpectedly, Holly simply hands Eric his phone without saying a single word before leaving the house. Not long afterward, Holly heads toward a place that now feels very familiar. She returns to the underground room where Seth once kept her imprisoned. However, the situation has now completely changed. Before, Holly was the one trapped inside the cage, but this time, Seth is the one locked inside instead. Seth's condition looks absolutely miserable. His body has become thin and weak, his skin appears dry and wrinkled, and his eyesight is nearly gone due to the worsening condition of his eyes. Yet strangely enough, Holly begins treating Seth with genuine care and attention. After everything they have gone through together, Holly finally believes that Seth is the only person who truly understands the darkness inside her. And that is where the story finally comes to an end.